Welcome to another episode of Trade Nerd Legends, where we celebrate the people who have shaped the field of global trade and customs into what it is today. So, today is one of those conversations that I've been looking forward to for a long time. Today's guest leads one of the largest customs brokerage operations on the planet. And even after over 30 years in the game, he still thinks like an innovator. Chris Rubio is the head of global customs brokerage strategy at UPS. He oversees complex compliance operations in more than 200 countries and territories. And he started his UPS career as a package driver before working his way through finance and systems and product development, consulting, all these things, and now in global strategy. Chris isn't just a leader, he is a forward thinking technologist. He pushes bold ideas through one of the world's largest companies. He's led transformations, integrated acquisitions, and even earned patents for brokerage innovations. And for nearly 20 years, I've had the pleasure of watching Chris champion brokerage modernization, navigating all this volatility while bringing his teams, his partners in this entire industry forward. I am so proud to be one of the many who has learned from Chris. He's a mentor, a connector, and one of those rare leaders who's just as excited to talk shop after hours as he is in the boardroom. So if you've been lucky enough to work with him, you know exactly what I mean. In the truest sense, Chris, you are a trade nerd. Thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for the warm introduction. I'm really looking
Yes.
forward to the conversation as well.
Oh, same, right? So you and I go way back, but I don't think I've ever really heard your origin story. Like, what first drew you into the customs world and what has kept you here all these years?
Yeah, it's fascinating. So my very first job um, ever, I was in the accounts payable department, and my job was as a college intern. I was responsible for matching purchase orders to invoices. And so in those days, it was such an arcane process. You had to manually do it. You had to check. And then once the invoice and the purchase order were matched up, then the process would go downstream for somebody to actually make the payment and then enter it into a system. And it was the very first thing I learned. And I thought, gosh, what a manual mess. There were so many POs, so many different invoices, just such a mess. And if you could imagine companies doing global purchasing at any big scale, you could see the immense problems with it. And so my journey led me through finance operations and financial systems and financial systems integrations. And then finally, I had an opportunity to come over to the customs area. And I didn't know too much about customs, but I was always involved in international at UPS. And so I took the opportunity to really dig deep into the customs area, and it was fascinating. And one of the very first problems that I saw that we needed to solve was the digitization of the invoice and PO problem. And that began my journey, and I just learned and became more and more fascinated with the complexities of international trade, as well as the process to operationalize it, as well as digitizing it, and to the moment where we find ourselves now in AI. But yeah, so I've always been fascinated by trade, using the base of my very first job ever.
That's kind of a cool story to start in that super manual part of the business. Like, I didn't know that. And that's really cool that it became the thing that took you into the custom space because clearly that's still a problem area
It
even
is.
today.
It's still a
Um,
problem area, right?
and when you say that you're fascinated by trade, I mean, a lot of people say that. People who have been doing trade work for a long time, like, oh, I'm fascinated. There's always something new. There's always something different. Um, what is it that fascinates you, do you think?
Yeah, I think just the opportunity to make connections between the three flows of commerce, from the physical world to the financial world to the digital world, and global trade really connects all of those three flows of commerce. And I think excelling in global trade requires you really to have a deep understanding of the opportunities in each of those three areas, and then connecting them in such a way so that goods can move around the world.
So that's a kind of a fascinating segue into one of the questions I wanted to ask you, because you have had a front row seat really to the rise of cross-border e-commerce, and that is also a mixing of the physical, the financial, the digital spaces. I mean, there was a time when nobody talked about parcels crossing country borders. It wasn't a big deal, but now it's like this trillion-dollar engine of global trade. What was it like for you to watch that evolution from the inside?
Yeah. So what a amazing time to see, trade explode at the rate that it has. I think if you think of
Yeah.
global e-commerce, probably the big catalyst was the de minimis change up to 800. So we were, I'd say that was probably a first big shift. Of course, mobile computing, that was really important to global trade. The platforms and their entrance into global trade, those were fascinating developments. But the de minimis change from 200 to 800 was a huge catalyst because it just opened up much more trade. And that created new opportunities for new players to enter. And then if you look at the rise of what became known as entry type 86 for those that are
Mhm.
in the business. That ultimately ended up becoming what 1.3 billion annual entries from a base of zero in a very short period of time. So the growth was just staggering, really. And so our business is right in the middle of it, our parcel business. Um, and so, it's been fascinating because it's taken us around the globe, and it's brought in new challenges to move goods quickly, to move information quickly, to scale, and to leverage technology to help us streamline trade. So it's really challenged us.
So I want to poke that a little bit more because de minimis, I mean, you talked about the shift from the 200 to the $800. We're in another de minimis shift, right? Where
Absolutely.
there is no de minimis
That's right.
anymore.
That's
So
right.
it's the one of the hottest topics.
That's right.
It's in several headlines. There's all these LinkedIn debates. There's Reddit threads on
That's
this. I'm even starting to see memes about where company like merchant small businesses are sharing their UPS receipts with the brokerage charges and all these things
right.
out with the world. So what's it from your perspective? So you're inside one of the biggest cross-border engines on the planet. Like
Right.
for the people on your team or the people on the inside that are trying to keep trade moving and trying to support all these companies, like how are you managing this?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thanks. Yeah, so right. So I told you first about the exponential growth in trade from 200 to 800. This is actually the reverse, right? So this moment is
Yeah.
from 800 to zero. So, but for us as the broker, obviously it creates a significant number of more customs entries that we've got to prepare. And so if you think about any business, we scaled first. From let's just say when the first shift happened for China to Hong Kong, maybe we were looking at maybe 2x of our volume of customs entries. And then with the de minimis elimination for the rest of the world that took place just a couple of weeks ago, you look at another maybe 4x. And so if you think about anyone's business, at scale, in such a short order, how would you be able to scale such an increase in volume and orders? You just simply couldn't do it. And in our case, the volume is customs entries. So,
Right.
so you have to lean on technology, and you really have to lean into good people and good ideas to identify how you can streamline the processes. And then, regarding the charges, it's a surprise to the small customer, right? So no one really on the planet understood the implications of de minimis and the new
Mhm.
tariffs. And so we're finding, customers are surprised by the fact that they have now got to pay for importing fees for the processing
Right.
of their cross-border goods, whereas in the past they didn't. And so we find a lot of surprise with it. We're trying to overcome that with good communication.
Wow. So on one hand, I mean, it must be really hard. So for anybody, watching this, go hug your UPS customs broker like right now. Support them. But it's also got to be kind of interesting for the people on the inside as well, because you are, like you said, there are no bad ideas. Like, champion the big ideas, let's try some new things. But if you personally could give a piece of advice, maybe to the folks that are either rewriting the rules, or to your customers who are running or trying to run a global e-commerce business, what advice would you give them?
I think one would be, choose your partners wisely. That I would certainly say that, and then understand the information requirements of the goods that you're trying to move around the world, and do your best to communicate with your stakeholders, whether it's end consumers or suppliers.
It's easier said sometimes than to do it, especially when everything feels like it's on fire, uh, like times like right now. How do you think we can turn this moment of what feels a little bit like chaos into a catalyst for progress? Is there a
Yes,
silver lining?
I think so. I think the promise is really in AI. So, if you start at the beginning, what I mentioned earlier was the matching principle with the PO and the invoice. So, in the cases where that's not digital, um, it's an imperative for that to be digital now.
Uh, I think those are really great pieces of advice, or
Yeah.
even just your own observations on how we can turn this moment into, we can come out better on the other end of
Yeah.
it. Um, well, I think we're still in a phase of having to educate a lot of the trade community about the value of those models. So just to hear you say that is music to my ears personally. But I want to switch gears now and like move away from the de minimis environment for a second. Uh, or maybe we'll come back to it. But in the time that you've been at UPS, you have helped navigate this business through some really incredible moments. There's been intense disruption. We had COVID, there are trade wars, there's geopolitical tensions. We talked about digitization, we talked about de minimis reform. Was there a moment in here that really tested you, and tested your motivation, tested your, like, push the boundaries of your innovation?
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
So I think, an early challenge for us was actually ACE, which was what, maybe 2010, 2011. That created a challenge for us because at the time we were operating on multiple systems in our company, and we had a strategy to consolidate, obviously, to become more efficient. So the challenge there was just dealing with multiple stakeholders, multiple software platforms, and bringing it all together so that we could actually have a comprehensive solution. What I learned there was really just to rely on the teams and really build out relationships and build out credibility with people, and then also, of course, engaging stakeholders. So really learning the CBP development lifecycle and becoming part of the ACE trade support network, working with some really good partners. And so
Oh,
being an active participant with CBP was helpful. So, and the fact that they were open to industry to provide feedback on how things were unfolding, that was a big aha moment that I could influence, or at least share with CBP, the opportunities for improvement. And I've used that moment for the rest of my career to work with different stakeholders, particularly with CBP and other customs agencies around the world, understanding that we could actually work with them, we could partner with them.
I hope those relationships come in handy to get us
Yeah,
through this time.
and in fact, they have. We've got a really good advocacy team, and we do our best to meet with CBP, share insights, particularly e-commerce.
Well, okay, so let's move into innovation, since this is a big area for you, something you are personally known for, something I love about working with you. And when people think about innovation, they think about these big lightning bolt moments like boom, innovation just strikes or an idea just strikes. But in an industry like ours and in a company like UPS, I imagine that the real work is in like 1,000 very tiny little baby step changes that nobody notices until everything suddenly runs smoother. What's something that you have helped build or push through that maybe didn't get a really big spotlight or a lot of attention or acknowledgement, but made a real difference?
Yeah, I love your understanding of how innovation happens because it does, in my experience, happen just as you said. So it's a
Yeah.
lot of little things that group together to make a really big impact. And so, just sharing the innovation journey, my favorite author of all time, Clayton Christensen, he wrote this incredible book called The Innovator's Dilemma. I love that book. But what I learned from that book was really studying and observing processes, and that became really just so helpful to me to my career journey. That so strategy and where to innovate doesn't really happen when you have this big grand whiz bang idea. In my experience, it's happened through observation, observing customers, observing transactions, observing operations, and through those observations you begin to chart a course that becomes your strategy. Some things that I've championed. One early one was we built an AI model to optimize merchandise processing fee, for example. We decided through some of the work that we were doing with AI that there was a smarter way for importers to think about the merchandise processing fee when they had a significant amount of entered value coming into the country. And we felt like you could probably de-risk your supply chain looking at port level data and looking at what you're bringing in. And we put together a model that we patented that optimizes how importers should clear. And then we gave them a tool that allowed them to decide how they'd like to build a consolidation. And then, champion little things. We've had a journey for digital trade in our business for many years. So we were at a very low percentage of digital trade for our international express business. And we're at a really significant high number of transactions that are digitized now. And that is so helpful to us.
I love the way that you described all of that. I mean, I get it now because it took me a long time. I was one of those really rash uh, trade people who I had the big idea and I'd get so frustrated when I couldn't make my big idea happen like overnight. And then I learned the hard way that, oh, you have to break it down into chunks. You have to take those baby steps and you have to bring, especially in something like trade compliance, where you have to bring the community, you have to bring your colleagues, you have to bring everyone along with you.
Whenever I'm talking to somebody about a big problem like what you're just describing, the first thing that I do is I say, hey, do you have a minute? Because if they don't have a minute, then they obviously don't want to talk about the problem because the problems in trade are so complex. There's never just one little thing. You have to really, so that's why I ask, look, if you want to learn about this problem, do you have a minute? And then we can talk about, the problem that we're trying to solve and ultimately, and which results in some opportunity.
Got to break it apart and like, because you're so right, that's where process mapping comes into play and really examining where the issues are, and if you change this thing, what happens to this thing, and just considering all of those. But that perspective is so valuable. I think it's helpful for anybody to learn from your remarks there. But when it comes to making change stick, and like in a place as massive as UPS, what have you learned about not only making the change but maintaining it?
Yeah, that's good. That's a really good question. So yeah, you know, um, to execute good innovation and strategy, of course, you've got to have the idea, you've got to have the data support it, you've got to have good people to implement it, and then you've got to have a good way to monitor progress, and then have really the fortitude to keep with it. Because if the solution that you're putting in place is going to help your company or your customers, you got to stick with it. And then, from an investment perspective, having the fortitude to continue on with an investment that's proving beneficial. There are very few things in this business that are set it and forget it. you have to keep at it. And I think that's really important. And that's a learning.
Well, set it and forget it is kind of how we sort got into some of the pickle that we're in right now. We took a lot of things for granted for a very long time.
That's right.
Well, so
Yes.
let's go back to AI for a second. What convinced you, or when were you convinced that AI wasn't just hype?
Yeah, good question. So this is about going probably 7 years ago. So we had an engagement with a good partner, and I learned a lot just being off site with this partner about what could be. And we were able to deliver a classification solution, and it wasn't perfect, but it was pretty good. And we thought, wow, that's working. And then, when you throw lots of data at an AI model, it learns fast, and all of a sudden you realize, wow, you could begin to see the scale of it. And the benefit that I have in the job that I have is we have a lot of transactions, so we can learn from just lots and lots of data. And then, of course, working with other partners. So I think just learning the different players that have different solutions, and then they help us solve our problems. Um, and they're always independent little problems, not ever one big whiz bang thing, like you say. And I think that's really the takeaway is, as you're thinking of AI, really to think about meaningful pockets. I mean, of course, there are some big ones. Like, for example, classification is no small one. That's a pretty big AI problem to solve. But along the way, there are others that you can use, and you can gain quick wins from some of those, and that may be helpful to people that are trying to justify why I should be in AI. If you're not participating in AI, you're missing out. It's an important tool in the toolkit of any trade compliance executive.
I love listening to you champion that and speaking directly to the community. Trade compliance or this or customs brokerage, like our space is so ripe for it's like the perfect use case for AI. So it'll only continue to get better and more exciting. And I think it's really sage advice for everyone to just lean in, like get into it, try it out. So I want to go into some just I call it lightning round, but it's just the fun question time.
Yeah.
Um, but I ask everybody, what is your favorite tariff code?
Okay, so mine is in chapter 82. It's knives, and I'll explain why. Um, some time ago, when I first started in this business, I felt that every product would have HTS code, and that was that. But I quickly learned that it's nuanced and it depends upon the use of the product. And so the reason that I picked that one because of knives, there are so many different uses of knives, and you might find knives in chapter 69 or in HTS code 8214 or 8208, depending on how the knife is going to be used. Some time ago, we did a little bake off on classifying products, and we gave the same product to multiple groups, and we found that the results were inconsistent. So big learning for me was like, wow, this is not really science, it's actually somewhat art form. So that was a big learning on classification for me. That's why I picked that one. It highlights the point.
No, I like it. I like it. Everybody has a different one, so I'm just fascinated. Okay, so what's something most people in the trade world don't know about you?
I love sports. Love my family. I like to run, and I was a DJ many years ago.
Okay, now I gotta ask, a DJ, radio,
A
a
nightclub DJ.
nightclub?
Yeah, very successful too. It was the greatest time of my life, greatest gig ever.
Do you still spin? Do you still
Uh,
DJ?
I can still. In fact, my son had a graduation party, so I was guest spinning at that with the DJ that was on hand. He couldn't believe I had the skills. I'm like, I got skills.
Do you have a
Yeah.
travel tip or like a ritual that keeps you sane?
What I do is I like to explore the place that I go to, and I like to make sure that I take the time to do the local thing wherever I'm at. And so I do. That's my tip, is to engage myself in the local customs, and you know eat the local food, and enjoy that, to see what people see. So that I always try and smell the roses when I go somewhere. And if I'm traveling with someone that's never traveled before, I tell them, make sure you do that.
No, and that keeps it fun, especially when it's all this
It's fun.
business.
That's right.
You got to go have a good time. Okay, so if you weren't in the customs business, what would you be doing?
Wow, that's a good one. I would probably like to be a sports coach. I'd like to do that. I'd like to coach.
Like football, basketball, what's your sport?
Football, yep, football, baseball, basketball, either in that order.
What advice do you have for newcomers in our business?
Yeah. Okay. This is such an interesting moment in this business. And what you'll find is that there's expertise in this business that is quite, for lack of a better word, old. And so, what a newcomer could bring to the picture is innovative ideas about how to deal with old problems. And what they can bring to the table is innovation and fresh thinking to solving old problems that experienced people, let's say it that way, may not be familiar with how to solve
Hmm,
problems in new ways. And I think that's what the newbies can bring in. And then, of course, for as a newbie, take the time to learn, because the experienced folks have a significant amount of knowledge that needs to be understood, because this is a complex business. It's not simple.
totally.
And so there's so much to learn. So take the opportunity to learn from someone as wise as you, for example, and then
Thank
lean
you.
into your instincts to innovate and move at a fast pace, which younger people today are much, much better at than the people that have been around quite a long time.
Oh, man, tell me about it. Every day at my company, some fresh young minds that don't have the baggage of knowing too much or the baggage of all of this trade business, and the ideas they come up with are mind blowing. It actually inspires me every day. So I agree
Fun.
completely. But the opposite is, what advice do you have for the veterans?
Okay, so the veterans, I would say, embrace technology. Make sure that you are exploring the art of the possible. It's really the opposite, right? So take some time to learn from folks that are doing things in different ways than the way you would. And I would say, engage yourself, immerse yourself in new ways of doing things, and then also make sure that you're out and you're embracing conferences and learning from people that are solving problems. Sometimes what I'll do sometimes is, we're solving a problem, and of course this business is so unique. What I'll ask myself is, well, what other business is kind of like this, that has a problem that's sort of like this but not exactly? And then I'll
Sure.
think about that, and then I'll try and learn from how that maybe parallel business solves a similar problem.
Super wise advice. Really good advice. Chris, thank you so much. You've led at scale. You've pushed through all this change. You've shown us what it looks like to innovate from the inside and out. I mean, you're shaping not just how global brokerage operates, but how people in this field think, how they grow, and how they lead. And again, for so many of us, you've been a mentor, a partner, and a source of inspiration. So today, you've reminded all of us that even in the most complex corners of global trade, de minimis, cross border e commerce, brokerage operations, all these things, progress is possible. And when you build the right teams and you embrace those hard problems, we can move forward. We will come out better. So, from all of us in the trade nerd community, we want to thank you. Thank you for the example you've set and the future you continue to build.
Thanks so much, Amy. It's my pleasure. It's such a pleasure to be with you, and I've enjoyed our relationship and learning from you, and collaborating with you over these years.
Pleasure's mine.